Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I used to love my job right after college. I was the typical young and cool teacher, and even though I'm still young, I'm just old enough that I've lost a lot of the respect of the students that I teach. For any young teachers out there, maybe you know what I mean. You seek the approval of your students. You want them to like you, because maybe if they like you, they'll pay attention more and enjoy what you're teaching. I felt like that for a few years, but then I noticed my test scores for students slipping. Not to mention, the students were a little too relaxed with me. 2 years ago, when I had about 10 kids in my class after school for some tutoring, half my students pulled out vape pens in the classroom. Of course, I got angry and yelled at the students, and they were shocked that I was upset, saying things like they thought it was cool and all that kind of stuff. I had to tell their parents, and that's when I realized that I couldn't be the hip teacher anymore and I needed to get more stern. So for the rest of the year, I really didn't play around. I still tried to be myself every day, but once I noticed the students fooling around or taking advantage of me, I would lay down the law, and let's just say I didn't make any friends. At the end of the school year, 2 years ago, I had to break up an altercation in the hallway that led to one student's expulsion from the school, and 2 other students starting the next year on a 1-week in-school suspension. On that last day of school, my car was egged in the parking lot, while a handful of students yelled some very colorful things at me as they drove away. I took a deep breath and just let it be. They would have the rest of the summer to cool off, and the next year would be a return to form, at least that's what I hoped. At the start of the school year last year, I couldn't have been more excited. I was rested, and I reformed my class structure a little bit to be more in line with what I thought the students would enjoy more. I had forgotten about the horrible way the year ended the previous year, and for me, it was water under the bridge. Not to mention that a lot of the health restrictions from the previous couple of years had been lifted, allowing the students to have a more conventional high school experience, which makes teaching more rewarding. On the first day of class, I was greeting the students for my first day, and I was immediately reminded of the altercation last year when 3 of the boys and 1 girl walked into my class right before the bell went off. As I said good morning to the group, the 4 of them just stared daggers at me. They took their seats, and all I could say to myself was, wow, the dedication to look that angry and miserable for an entire class takes some skill. Towards the end of class, I called one of the boys to answer a question, and he responded in an angry and almost hateful voice, saying, "You know, I might be in your class, but you don't ever have to say my name again." Oh, the joys of teaching. Thankfully, I was saved by the bell, and I didn't have to respond in front of the entire class. I tried to talk to him after, and he just shouted to stay away from him. Unfortunately, I couldn't let that type of attitude stand in the classroom, especially not on the first day. During a free period, I went to the office and explained to the principal what was happening. She was angry and immediately paged the young man to the office. He stormed in there, and as soon as he saw me sitting in one of the chairs, he said, "Are you kidding me? You ratted me out?" Instead of beating the kid down verbally and yelling at him, we tried to use it as a teaching moment. We tried to drive home the fact that he was not in trouble and that we just wanted to talk. Maybe this was the wrong approach, and we should have just given the kid detention, but I never liked doing that. People have rough days, and sometimes you just need to talk things out. After a 30-minute meeting of going nowhere, we sent him back to class, and the principal said that he wanted to give him detention or suspension to really set the precedent for the year, but I talked him out of it. That afternoon, I saw the young man leaving, and I tried to tell him to have a good night and shake his hand, but instead, when he saw me, he gave me another, not so favorable, hand gesture involving one of your fingers, if you know what I mean. I went home, and at the start of last year, when the story took place, I was still living alone. I just cracked open a beer and decided to relax on the couch and watch some TV for a while. The first day always takes a lot out of me. Before I knew it, it was after 2 in the morning. I had accidentally fallen asleep on the couch, I still had a beer in my hand, and I was still wearing my pants from work. I shut the TV off and started to make my way to the bedroom. As I was walking in the dark house, I heard a loud thud. I paused for a second, trying to process what it could have been. My first thought was that I was so groggy and out of it, I probably just imagined whatever the sound was, but then I heard it again. I slowly crept down the hall, trying to listen intently. I could feel my heart racing out of my chest. At the end of the hall, right to the right is my bedroom, which faces the front of the house, and to the left is a guest room I don't use, which faces the back of the house. The door to the guest room is usually mostly shut, so I had to open it a little bit to look in there, and the image I saw still scares me when I think about it. Nearly completely in my guest room, hanging from a window, was the student from earlier in the day. He was wearing a health mask and had a Pittsburgh Steelers hat on. Even with all of that on, I could clearly tell it was the young man from school. I screamed instinctively, and it caused him to fall back, taking the blinds down with him as he fell. He got to his feet in the room, took a half step in my direction as if to scare me or something, and then Superman dove out of the window. I saw him run to the other side after he jumped, so I ran to the front of the house to look out the window. I saw him jump into what I think was a white Toyota, and there were 3 other people in the car, and they peeled off into the night. I immediately called the cops right away. Now, this is where I thought I was being stupid, and maybe I was. The cops came, and I told them about the break-in and what happened. I failed to mention what type of car it was, and I didn't tell them who I thought it was. The next day at school, I saw the young man pull into the parking lot with that same white Toyota, and any doubts I had went away as soon as I saw the car. I confronted him in the hallway, and he looked like he was going to be sick. I stuck my hand out and I said, "Truce," and he slapped my hand away quickly like he didn't want anyone to see and walked away. I then got him removed from class the following Monday, and I didn't have another interaction with the boy all year. My hope is that he learned his lesson and never tried anything like that again. A handful of times over the year and during this past summer, I've had some pranks happen on my property, but nothing serious like a break-in, and I have no evidence to know who it was that pulled these so-called pranks. I finally installed a Ring camera just a week ago. I think I saw that white Toyota parked in front of my house for about an hour, but nothing ever happened. I didn't see anybody I recognized get out of the car, and I prayed it was just a coincidence since I live with my fiancé now. She doesn't know about the break-in, and we're planning on moving soon anyway. I guess I'm writing this to see what anybody out there thinks anonymously before I pull out any names or locations. Should I call the police? Or do you think I should continue to give him another chance? This story happened almost 10 years ago now, and it still bothers me and gives me nightmares. I try to use it as a lesson to myself, instant karma, if you will. When I was in high school, I was always looking for acceptance from my peers. I was definitely the odd one out whenever there were activities, and I was lucky to get an invite. I was usually the one who would do crazy things just to get people to like me, but I would never do anything illegal. I would do things more dangerous. For example, one time I rode a bike off of my buddy's 20-foot garage into a pool. I almost broke my neck, and the only reason I didn't get seriously hurt was because I was wearing slides and not sneakers. My slide got stuck in one of the pedals, and if I was wearing sneakers, the shoe probably would have gotten caught also, and I would have missed the pool and hit the ground. Also, I feel the need to say, please do not try that. This pattern of acceptance went all through middle school and high school. Right before the start of our senior year, I was with a couple of my so-called friends, having one last get-together for the summer. I was invited because my uncle was a janitor at the high school, and they begged me to steal the key to the school, which I did, even though everything in my gut was telling me not to. Their plan was to break into the school and essentially create chaos before the first day. Our school was smaller and not like some of the bigger schools out there. We only had one CCTV camera in front of the school by the doors, and we were going to use the key to enter through the back door so the cameras wouldn't even pick us up. The plan was airtight, at least that's what I convinced myself. I knew it was wrong, and these were not the kind of guys I wanted to hang around, but back then, when I was just confused, it seemed like if I did this, maybe I would be an actual member of the friend group and not just the crazy one. That night, we waited until my friend's parents went to bed, and we all rode our bikes to the school, which was about a mile away. I had the key, and I was nominated as the one to unlock the door before they said, and I quote, "I'm the most badass of the group." It helped to hear that, even though I felt like throwing up at this point. It was real now. We were pulling into the back parking lot of the school, and my friends were chanting and cheering me on. I went to the back door and unlocked it. We went inside, and the uneasiness got even worse somehow. Something about being in a school after dark in the middle of the night is just objectively creepy. Especially our school, since it was old and not very up to date. All the sounds of the pipes creaking and whatnot scared me half to death. I thought there was a ghost or other people in there, but I think it was just the old building. My friends began tipping desks and ripping things off the wall. They went into the cafeteria and started knocking over tables and chairs and just creating chaos, as they said. I actually liked the school and learning, so this was hard to watch, but I wanted to be accepted more than I cared about school at that point, so I just engaged with them. We spent about an hour, maybe a little less, just running around the school. We went into the main stairwell, and one of my friends pulled out a pack of cigarettes and started smoking. He wanted it to smell like smoke on the first day, and all of us laughed and went along with his plan. Before finally leaving, one of my friends suggested doing something really bad in the principal's office, specifically on his desk. I don't even want to write it down, what it was, and let's just say that it would have been over the line for me. We made our way to the office, and just as we shut the office door, I told my friends to be quiet. They looked at me like I had 3 heads, but the reason I said something wasn't for some moral compass I found, it was because I heard something. We all ducked down and looked through the glass windows in the office that overlooked the halls of the school. At first, they all thought that I was being paranoid since I had been a bit off since the start of the adventure, but then one of the other guys heard it too. It was clearly the sound of voices. We all sunk down under the desk, trying to figure out how to get out of this predicament. Our bikes were in the bushes out back, and we couldn't go through the front door, which was right outside the office we were in. The voices stopped right outside the office. They were muffled, so we couldn't figure out what they were saying. We didn't know if it was the cops, the administration of the school, or maybe even someone else with the same idea. Finally, I peeked up, and at that point, I was even more scared. It was 3 men, dressed in full tactical gear, with flashlights. These were not police officers. These guys were much different. I tried explaining to my friends who was out there, and they didn't understand what I was saying. We must have been too loud because one of the men outside kicked open the door and shouted, "Who's in there?" I froze, and I thought my friends would do the same, but finally, their panic kicked in, and they all ran out of the door, trampling me down in the process. They caught the other guys off guard. My friends were able to make a sprint out of the building. I was left there, alone with these dudes. They started laughing at me. And at that point, I was embarrassed, scared, and ultimately defeated all at one time. Then I hear one of the guys yell, "The cops are here," and they all ran. I got up, and as soon as I ran down the hall by myself, I was intercepted by real police who very quickly and very roughly apprehended me. My parents and the school were notified right away, and I was immediately expelled from school. I was heartbroken. After thinking about it, I finally decided to throw the others under the bus with me, and they all denied it. My one friend's parents even vouched for all of them, saying that they were staying overnight at the house and that they didn't sneak out. I was thrown to the wolves all by myself and then lost my fake friends from ratting them out. All the destruction to the school was solely blamed on me, and I was responsible for paying any of the damages. I was even charged and arrested for this ordeal, which took a long time for me to recover from. But there's something I never got closure on. Who were those men in that gear? When I explained that part to the cops, they nearly bust a gut from laughing so hard. They didn't rob anything. They didn't come from another robbery, I guess. They were just there. I guess the easy explanation is that it was other students attempting to do the same thing that we were doing, but my only doubt with that is that the gear they had seemed extremely legit and professional, and it didn't make sense for some high school students to have stuff like that, at least not in my hometown. Does anybody out there have any idea or theories as to what these guys were doing? Someone recently told me that they thought the tactical guys were in on it, and it was all a prank to get me busted by the police. That was an idea I never thought of until it was mentioned to me, and I hate to admit that the more I think about it, the more it adds up. And if that is the case, I hope they all get what's coming to them. I did end up getting my GED, and I currently do have a pretty good job, so I ended up okay after all of this, but it wasn't easy. And it just goes to show you that acceptance isn't always good. My entire life changed just because I thought that I had to do it in order to fit in. And let my tragedy be a good lesson to any young people out there. If something doesn't feel right, you're probably correct. And ignoring that feeling and giving in to a bad idea could lead to years of trouble. 13 years ago, I was getting ready to start my senior year of college. I couldn't wait to finish this last step and begin my new life in what they have always called the real world. Given my hopeful career path, my advisor told me that I should serve as a mentor for incoming freshmen, to act as essentially a big sister to the incoming students, you know? College can be scary and overwhelming for new students, especially those who have come from smaller schools, so this program would be set up to guide these new students and help them break into the college system with as little anxiety as possible. I loved the idea, and as my advisor said, this would look great on my resume. I wish I had a program like this when I was a freshman. I would have been so lost and nervous my first few months. I arrived at school about a week early and met with my advisor to get all the information needed. This year, the program would be a little bit different compared to what it was the previous couple of years. In the first 2 years of the program, the seniors involved would almost serve as student advisors and help the freshmen, but this year, we were being assigned individual freshmen. I was excited, I'm not going to lie. I got a handful of students from the advisor, and I spent that first week before school emailing them and setting up appointments, meet and greets, and whatever else they might need. I offered tours, sitting for coffee, talking about campus activities, you name it. My mindset was to be as loose and flexible as possible and allow the incoming students to ask me whatever they wanted and talk about whatever concerns they had, instead of me dictating to them what I thought they wanted to hear. As the new students poured in, it was great. I met a handful of my assigned students, and I can honestly say that I felt good. I truly felt like I was helping them to feel a little less anxious. I met someone named Madison. She had canceled 2 previous meetup attempts with me, and I was beginning to think that Madison was going to be one of those students who didn't really need assistance. I could not have been more wrong. She needed assistance, but not from me. We finally met at around noon on that first day. A beautiful young woman met me outside of the Student Center building, and at first, it was a lovely conversation. She seemed confident, independent, and not afraid of anything. After a few minutes of talking to Madison, I asked her why she wanted to be in this program. I emphasized to her that it had nothing to do with her, but more due to the fact that she seemed so confident. Her answer didn't make me think of anything weird at the moment. All she said was that she just wanted to talk to me and see what it's like to be a senior in such a great school. I was flattered, and it was honestly kind of nice to talk to such a well-adjusted young lady since I had spent so much time talking to students who were afraid of their own shadows. We talked for probably 15 or 20 minutes, and then we exchanged numbers. I didn't ask her to meet again because I didn't feel like she needed my assistance, and I told her that she could call or text me anytime she wanted, and if she ever needed to talk, she could reach out to me. And that was the last time I saw Madison for a few weeks. Almost a month later, I started getting notes left by my car. They were short and sweet notes, and they were always signed by a secret admirer. I mean, they were literally signed with the name Secret Admirer. I thought it was cute, kinda cringe, but dating was the last thing on my mind, so I didn't ever wonder who it was. It seemed like it was left by a guy, just from the style of the handwriting, you know. Things started getting weird after those notes. I would still be getting them all the time, but I would start getting them left on my car when I was at work, the store, and even the movies. It seemed like no matter where I went, I was being left a love note. And then the notes started getting weird, saying things like, "I just love you so much," and "I can't wait until you notice me and we can be together forever." I was convinced at this point it wasn't one of my friends messing with me or something. I was always the butt of the joke among my friends because I had no desire to date, and this type of long-term prank was something I could absolutely see my friends doing. So no matter how many times I called them out and tried to compare the handwriting, there was never a match, and nobody ever confessed. My friends were nervous about my well-being at that point, and I always kind of dismissed it. I stubbornly convinced myself that it was a joke and that I was done giving them any satisfaction about it. At the time, I worked a semi-overnight shift at a grocery store. I would go in at 9 p.m. and work until 3 a.m. in the morning. I would hang price tags throughout the night and fix signs and stupid things like that. They paid a little extra for working overnights, and I needed the money since I was a broke college student. I punched out a little after 3 and started making my way to my car in the nearby empty parking lot. As I walked around my car, I saw someone squatting next to my driver's side door. It was a smaller person, and they seemed like they had a hood on. I jumped back at that moment and started to scream. The person ran over to me, tackling me to the ground. But instead of beating me up or something like that, they just kept saying in a soft voice, "Shoo, relax, it's me, I'm here now." I recognized that voice, but I couldn't put my finger on it in the panic. As I was moving on the ground, the person's hood came off, and I instantly was able to put the voice to a face. It was Madison from the first week of school. I tried pleading with her at first in the confusion, and then my pleas turned to anger and panic. She was sitting on my chest, telling me to relax. Thankfully, the night manager happened to be outside smoking a cigarette and had heard some commotion and started to run over to my car. Madison jumped up and tried telling the man that I was her girlfriend and that he needed to get lost. I could tell the manager thought about it for a second, but I was able to scream at him to just call the police. And that's when Madison started to get angry and started to throw punches down at my face. The manager called the police, shoving Madison off of me so I could get to my feet. I stood behind the manager, waiting for the cops, and Madison didn't leave. She just stood there, on the other side of the car, with her arm out in my direction. She seemed like she was crying. I could see that pain in her eyes. I felt bad for a moment, and then I realized that she was just beating me up, and that empathy vanished pretty quickly when I realized how insane she was. The cops arrived, and they took Madison. I didn't press charges, but I did threaten to. Her parents pulled her out of school, and I never heard from her again. It all just happened so quickly. I don't know how true this last part is that I'm about to tell you, as I heard it through the grapevine, but I was told by a trusted source that when I gave her my number during that first meeting, she thought that was a sign of advancement on my part, and she was trying to win me over with the secret notes. She thought I might recognize her handwriting, which I never would, so she would write the notes with her offhand so it looked messy. When she finally reached the courage to call me, my number didn't work. Either I wrote it down wrong for her or she put it in her phone wrong, and she took it as an insult and needed to win me over. And that was the night she attacked me at my job. Whether that last part is true or not, the fact that the encounter happened at all is enough to haunt my dreams. I won't forget that feeling of helplessness when she was on top of me, for what felt like a very long time. I was always one of those students who hated school. I was a poor student, and I lived for summer vacation, hanging out with friends all night, trying to impress the girls, and, most importantly, sleeping in. I hated everything about school. One year, on the last day of summer before school, I talked my buddy Will into sneaking out with me. Before heading back to school for another horrible year, I wanted to end summer in some style. We didn't plan on doing anything crazy. We didn't want to commit any crimes or anything like that. We just wanted to feel free. Something about walking in the streets at night, when you're supposed to be inside, felt rebellious and free, you know? And since the next day was back to school, this was our last chance of summer to do so. I snuck out of the house around 10 at night. The plan was to meet in the cemetery, beside his house, at 10:30. I showed up a little before 10:30, and no Will anywhere. I waited for about 15 minutes, and then I texted him. He messaged me right away and said that his parents were still awake watching a movie and he had to wait to sneak out. I was annoyed, but I understood. I didn't want him to get into trouble, and then by extension, I would get into trouble if his parents found out that he was meeting me. I waited for a while, messaged him every 10 minutes or so, and his responses were always the same. After about an hour, the annoyance of the situation went away, and I started to get a little creeped out. I know it's silly, but sitting in the dark and cold cemetery for that long started getting a little unnerving. I felt like I could hear noises all around me, and I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but it still didn't make it any less scary. Around midnight, I was just about to give up hope on Will getting out of the house when I heard a voice whisper, "Hey, what are you doing?" I turned around and had a sigh of relief, thinking that it was Will. But when I turned around, I didn't see anyone. I loudly whispered his name, and I didn't see him. I could hear that distinct sound of sticks and twigs snapping, but it was so dark that no matter how hard I squinted, I couldn't see a single thing. Then, a figure emerged from behind some tree in the graveyard. I jumped because it was jarring to see a person just standing there, and in an annoyed but slightly relieved voice, I said, "You idiot, that joke isn't funny, man." The figure didn't say anything and didn't move. I took one step toward the figure and paused. They were probably 30 feet away if I had to guess, and while I was staring at them, I noticed something strange. They appeared much taller and bigger than Will. He was undoubtedly my smallest friend, standing at only about 5 feet 3 inches and maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. The figure was at least 6 feet tall. I whispered Will's name again, and it didn't move. I pulled out my phone to call him, and I received a text message right at this moment from Will saying, "Sorry, man, I'm just leaving the house now, be there in 5. I was frozen. If Will was just leaving now, then who was the person who was standing across from me? For a brief second, I thought maybe this was some joke. Maybe he talked to one of our friends into sneaking out, and they were going to try and scare me. I shouted and whispered to the person, "You know, it's not working." Will told me about this joke. That was my poor attempt to fish out some response from them, but they still didn't move. Then I got another text a second later from Will. "Sorry, dude. Mom just saw me in the kitchen. No way I can get out tonight. I'll see you tomorrow in school." I still couldn't tell if this was part of the joke or if he was serious. If he was telling the truth, then this figure standing near me most likely meant harm to me, and I was in real danger. I decided to call Will. While my eyes were locked on this person, he answered, and I quietly explained what was happening to me, and I asked if he had anything to do with this. I could tell by his voice that he was scared for me. He reiterated that now he was in bed, and he had sent me a picture of him in his room. He told me to run, but I was terrified to even move. My house was in the direction of that person, and I didn't want to run further into the cemetery with a potentially dangerous person on my tail. Being young and stupid, I was more scared of getting in trouble with my parents, so I didn't call the cops, and I begged Will not to tell his parents or call the police, even though he practically begged me to call. If this happened to me today, I would call the police almost right away, but back then, the sometimes irrational mind of a teenager could be stupid. I started to take a few small steps backward, with Will still on the phone. After a few steps back, I noticed that the person was taking a few steps forward in my direction. I decided to run as fast as I could. I'm somewhat fast, and I figured that I would run the opposite way and then loop around to get back to the main road. Throughout this whole ordeal, I was the most scared I'd ever been in my life. While I was in full sprint, running for my life, I turned back and saw the figure running at me like a freight train. This person was fast, extremely fast, and I didn't think that I was going to be able to outrun them. But I ran faster than I ever had, and I never turned back. I would hear rushing footfalls behind me every so often, but before I knew it, I couldn't hear anything. When I finally turned around again, I was out of the cemetery and on my street. I ran to my house and snuck in the side door. I went to my bedroom, shut the lights off, and stared out the window. I looked at every dark corner of the street all night long. I didn't see anybody, but I just had that sick feeling that he somehow followed me. I never snuck out again after that night, and I was terrified of just being outside my house after dark. I was convinced for a long time that I wasn't safe, and I would constantly check the locks in my house to make sure everything was locked up tight. I have no idea who that person was that night. I don't know their intentions. I don't know if they wanted to hurt me or just scare me, but whatever it was, I'm happy that I was able to get out physically unharmed. It's been a long time since that night, but even to this day, I will not go into a graveyard after dark. I know it's irrational, but I never even want to think about seeing that person ever again. Being in a dark cemetery will cause me to think that every shadow I see is that figure coming to finish what they started. I don't blame anyone who doesn't like sports. I totally understand if playing or watching sports is not your thing. My wife hates sports with a passion, so I don't even try to get her to watch games with me. I never forced anyone, even though I love football more than anything in the world. I was fortunate enough to be able to play football in college, and it was an amazing experience, hard and challenging at times, but truly amazing. And as a college athlete, we had to head back to school early and start training. We would have weightlifting sessions, field practice, cardio training, you name it. Before the first day of school, we were already a well-oiled machine. Waking up early for class was never an issue because we would have mandatory workouts at 4:30 in the morning. This is going to sound horrible, but sometimes playing on a football team gave me special treatment in class. Not with my grades, but with extra help, whether it was from the teacher or other students. I know it sounds kind of vain, but a lot of students loved me, and I would take advantage of that love and have them help me with assignments. Interpret that how you will, but let's just say that I had more than a few fans in school. By the time my junior year came around, I was a well-known name around campus. Now, sidebar, I was good, but not good enough to play in the NFL. But at the time, I was one of the better players on the team, and everyone wanted to say that they knew me. I was ready for an amazing season, and I couldn't wait to hit the field. We showed up early to campus like every year, and we all lived that football life for a few weeks. One day after practice, I met a girl in the training facility, and her name was Sarah. She was pretty, and she seemed into me. And what I really liked, though, was that she seemed into what I had to say, and not the fact that I was just kind of a jock, I guess. We talked for a while and hung out that night. Nothing crazy, we just watched a movie. For some reason, though, I never questioned why she was there. At this point, it was only athletes and a few others on campus. I guess I just assumed that she played soccer or was on the track team or something. We exchanged numbers, and I told her that I would text her the next day, which I did. She gave me one-word answers and kinda gave me the impression that she wasn't interested, so instead of wasting her time, I never messaged her again after that next day. I felt like we vibed, and I got a good feeling hanging out with her. I actually felt at one point that hanging out with this girl, she was easily girlfriend material, and I'd love to spend time with her. I was a little broken up on the inside when she seemed uninterested, but like I said, I didn't want to waste her time, and I wanted to move on before my feelings sprouted even more. The next day, I was in the locker room after a pretty tough workout. I was the last one in there, and I was just cleaning myself up a bit. I heard some footsteps on the other side of the room, and I didn't really give it a lot of thought. The first place my mind went was that it was another player or coach, so I didn't really think anything of it. The movement eventually stopped, and after a few minutes of not seeing anyone or hearing the door open, I started to get a little weirded out. I asked who was there, but nobody responded. I started walking toward the door, which was behind a wall, since the locker room was a giant L-shaped room. As I was getting closer to the wall, I heard the footsteps sort of scamper away, and the locker room door slammed shut. Now I was freaked out. There was definitely a person in there, essentially listening to me or watching me and not saying anything, and when I called them out, they ran. I told some of the guys on the team about it, and their sort of tough guy routine kicked in, and they were all about teaching this peeping Tom a lesson, which was kind of funny. I figured they'd just make fun of me. A few days later, I was in my dorm room, and I heard a clicking sound on my window. I have a dark curtain on my window, because when I have a day off, I hate having the sun wake me up. It's weird to describe, but I felt so uncomfortable about the locker room incident that I was a little freaked out moving the curtain back. I didn't want to see someone standing there. A few of the players I've played with over the years have had some minor run-ins with some weirdos and stalkers and all that kind of stuff, and it's not something that I wanted to deal with. I eventually put that fear in the back of my mind and went back to the curtain to find Sarah actively trying to get into my room. I freaked out, slammed the now quarter-open window shut, and locked it. She just stared at me with these sort of dead eyes through the window. I immediately went to my phone and called the police. I told them what happened, and it didn't take long for them to find her. When they found her, she had a pocket knife in her pocket, and she wasn't a student. She was just some obsessed fan, and she wanted to be with me. And I was actually interested in her, but when we were texting, she had already convinced herself that I didn't want to be with her or something. We had met at a party the previous year, and I had no memory of this interaction. According to her, it was an emotionally fueled greeting, but I guess witnesses to the encounter said that I kinda just said hello with a nice smile on my face. And that's probably why I don't remember. I'm usually very good at remembering names and faces. The cops found pictures of me on her phone from weeks prior to us even communicating. I was still at my family home, and she had pictures from outside my house. She had pictures of me at practice. She even had pictures from the locker room, nothing bad, I guess, just a couple of pictures of me with my shirt off, sitting on the bench, reading something on my phone. Obviously, Sarah was arrested, and the school sort of swept this under the carpet to not have any bad publicity before the season opener. Some people are just twisted, and I'm so thankful that I pulled back that curtain that night. I still shiver when I think about what she could have potentially done to me if I was sleeping or didn't hear her. I don't know where Sarah is today, but I hope wherever she is, she's on the path to recovery but never has the chance to hurt anybody else again. This story took place 15 to 20 years ago during the summer and fall of my freshman year of college. I chose to go to a school within my home state that was only a few hours away from my house. I remember being both excited and nervous to start this new chapter of my life. At this school, we were not able to pick our roommates, and it was done by random draw. At some point during the summer, we were given our roommates' contact information. I don't remember if it was a phone number, AIM screen name, or Facebook information. And yes, when I was going into college, texting was relatively new, and AIM, AOL Instant Messenger, was still around. Anyway, I remember I never talked to my roommate on the phone, but we chatted online. Everything started out normal, with talking about how excited we were and what each of us could bring. I think I was going to bring the mini fridge, and they were going to bring a TV. We exchanged our favorite movies, favorite types of music, and other tidbits like that, just to get to know each other a little better. After the second or third time we talked, my roommate, who I'll refer to as Phil, began to get more comfortable and open up about his high school experiences. He mentioned that he had gotten into some trouble and had to switch schools a couple of times, but he wasn't that person anymore and was working on bettering himself. I myself had gone through some issues in high school as well, so I was happy to be supportive of someone who was working on self-improvement. However, the more he shared, the more uncomfortable I started to become. I don't remember the specifics, but I remember Phil sharing instances of violence stemming from alcohol usage. I think he could sense, based on my responses, that I was a little uncomfortable with the conversation, so he quickly changed the subject to something positive. We didn't talk much more than that during the summer, and before you knew it, move-in day was already here. I don't remember the specifics of moving in other than having to go up to a student to get my room assignment and seeing my dad cry for only like the second time in my life when he was leaving to go back home. Phil didn't arrive until my parents had already left, and he didn't have anyone with him when he arrived. I tried to initiate some small talk, but he was very upset and didn't say much. He set up the TV and a gaming system and headed off to go to dinner. I had a few of my close friends from high school also at the same school as me, so I knew that I would spend most of my time with them. I brought a few of my friends back to the room to check out my setup, and Phil was sitting in his bed playing a game and didn't respond when I introduced my friends to him. We decided to leave and go hang out with my friend Dustin in his room, which was across campus. A few days passed without issue. Phil and I hadn't really talked at all, but to be fair, we didn't really see each other that much. We had full class schedules, and I also had a job about 2 miles down the road from campus that I was going to try and keep part-time. I had to stop about a month in because it was too much, even though I did end up working the following 3 years in college. One night, about 2 or 3 weeks into the first semester, I remember being really hot and rolling over to turn up my fan when I saw somebody right by my bed. My heart started racing, and I immediately jumped up, saying, "Phil?" There was no response, and I just saw that sort of shadowy person walk backward and slide back into bed. I tried to go back to sleep, but found it very hard to do so, obviously. The next day, I didn't see Phil until the afternoon and asked him what was going on. He said that he must have been sleepwalking and just ended the conversation. After about 4 or 5 times of inviting Phil to come hang out with my friends, I stopped. It didn't seem like he had any interest, and I didn't want to press it any further. I remember one day I just didn't feel like going to economics class, and I skipped and went back to the room to lie down. When I walked in, I saw Phil looking through my desk. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "Oh, I'm late for class." I was just looking for a pen, and then he bolted out of the room. This wouldn't seem so weird, but the next time I decided to skip class and head back to the room, he was in my closet. I didn't even wait for an excuse. I just told him to stay out of my stuff. I remember that conversation distinctly because that night, Phil must have had another instance of sleepwalking because I woke up to him again, hovering over my bed, breathing heavily. This time, he spoke and said, "Nighty-night." I didn't respond. At this point, I started looking into if there were any other rooms I could move into where people had maybe left school or decided not to come at all. I ended up meeting with the RA on the floor, and they said that they would let me know when something opened up, as there were other students looking for new roommates in other rooms to move into as well. By this time, it was around Halloween, and my friends and I were excited to go to our first college parties. Also, I love Halloween, so it was a nice distraction from school, which had been stressful for the first few months. Phil, who was normally either watching TV or playing video games, came in and was dressed up as Ghostface, brandishing his signature weapon in his hand as well. Ghostface is one of my favorite horror characters, so I remember kind of saying, "Badass," because the costume looked really good. I asked him what his plan was for the night, and he responded with, "Mischief, I'm sure of it." Little did I know that that would be the last time I saw Phil. After the college party, my friends and I went home for a few days to do laundry and have one of our own parties back in our hometown. When I returned, one half of my room was completely packed up and gone. Apparently, Phil had an altercation on campus, and when they did a search of the room, they found that his prop knife wasn't a prop at all. I also received a write-up for my lamp, as apparently, we weren't supposed to have that type of lamp in our dorms. I was never filled in on the details of Phil's dismissal. As I said, there was some sort of issue on campus, and apparently, it warranted a room search, and there were items in his possession that led to expulsion. Phil did try to reach out to me online, but I blocked his accounts and tried to forget the first few months of school. I ended up not having a roommate for the first year, which was nice because my friends would usually just crash there if they didn't feel like walking back to their rooms. This was one of the creepiest and scariest encounters of my life. It didn't seem like it at the time, but looking back on it, I wonder if I was ever in any danger or what really happened that led to Phil's dismissal from school. I'm just glad that it worked out okay, and I never had to hear from that weirdo again. When I was in my late 20s, I hit a rough patch in my life. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I had recently spent some time in prison, and I was trying to just get everything in order. A friend of my mom's had some connections to the local university, and this person pulled some strings and got me a job as a maintenance clerk for the school. My official title was fancy, but I was a janitor. But I'll say being just a janitor paid pretty well for a big university. It was more money than I had ever made before, and it wasn't bad for someone trying to get on their feet post-prison. I started right at the tail end of one school year, and I spent the entire summer being one of the late-night maintenance men for the school. I worked my way up from cleaning bathrooms and classrooms to being an actual maintenance man. I was fixing things instead of cleaning them, which was much more my speed. I almost felt like a new student as the school year was coming closer. The thought of all the students filling the school was just exciting for some reason, probably because I never got to do the college thing, so it was rewarding to see all these people trying to make something of their lives. One thing I will say, though, is that the school was never empty. It's not like high schools, where when summer comes, the schools are practically empty other than an event here or there. Universities always had students or faculty walking around, either taking summer classes, doing some type of tutoring, or even playing sports. Even though it was never empty, it was much more desolate during the summer, hence why I was excited for the beginning of the school year at the end of August. Once the semester officially started, I was going to be taken off the night shift and become one of the regular maintenance staff members. I was excited, and I could see myself turning this into a real career. The first week of class had started, and I was busier than I ever could have imagined. I was helping teachers fix projectors, I was helping the school with painting, and I was even responsible for heading to the dorms to help students fix easy issues that nowadays a simple YouTube search could probably fix. I know it sounds like I'm just complaining, but I honestly loved this busy work. I was learning a lot, making money, and helping folks along the way. I knew it was only a matter of time before something happened that wasn't so great. And let me first say that I know this wasn't the school's fault and that I had no control over the events that took place. It's just whenever I think back to this day, I'm reminded of one of the most horrifying events of my life. It was only the first week of classes, and it was toward the evening. I was exhausted, and I couldn't wait to call it a night. Down in the basement, the maintenance department had a makeshift office where we would drink coffee, eat some food, or just kick it for a little while. I was heading to the basement, and I heard some commotion going on. The basement of this building is huge and almost maze-like. If you didn't know where you were going, you'd probably just wander around for a while. So instead of making my way to the office, I followed the noise of the commotion because it sounded like someone moaning in agony. As I turned down one of the corridors that led to an open space with a bunch of storage, I saw three dudes, definitely students, given their age, and they were actually beating up another student. I immediately shouted for them to stop, and they ran away in the opposite direction. There are several staircases up to the main floor, so they didn't need to run by me to get upstairs. Instead of chasing them, I stopped to make sure that the student on the ground was okay. He was in pain, but thankfully he was breathing. As I briefly examined him, I noticed that he didn't have any bruises or cuts or anything like that. I thought at the moment maybe they were just kicking his sides or something because he looked completely fine. I was trying to grab my phone to call the police, and I noticed the kid on the ground began to smile. Before I could even ask what was going on, I felt an intense pain in my head, and I fell to the ground. Everything was a little blurry at this point, but I saw the 3 other students come back and help the student on the ground. All 4 of the students were now laughing, and then the next thing I remember was seeing one of the students raise his arms with something in it, swing it in my direction, and then just blast. I woke up several hours later in the maintenance office with my hands cuffed by the police. All I could smell was whiskey. And that's when I noticed I was covered in whiskey, like these boys poured an entire bottle on me. Without going into details, my former prison time was alcohol-related, and I wasn't supposed to drink anymore, which I didn't, but from the cops' point of view, I smelled like it. To make matters even worse for me, they found me smelling like this on the job, and they probably thought that I was drunk because I was somewhat delirious and was finding it hard to form sentences. This nightmare continued for several hours as I was being detained. I was finally able to get the words out that I wanted my lawyer, and thankfully, she showed up pretty quickly. The cops did not want to hear my story and just assumed that I had blacked out drunk in the basement of the school. I told my lawyer everything that happened, and it was like trying to pull teeth to get the police to listen. But they finally started to listen and got the security camera footage from the school, and thankfully, the footage proved my innocence. The footage showed the boys following me on my last job of the evening. It showed them going into the basement, and the idiots set up their fake mugging in front of one of the cameras in the basement too. The students didn't count on the camera being down there. The cameras showed every detail of what happened. The other 3 snuck back and hit me on the head with some large pipe or something like that. They dragged me into the office and poured a whole bunch of whiskey all over me, like I said. And not only did this footage prove that I didn't touch a drop of alcohol, but it also showed all 4 students committing this act. They swiftly arrested all of them, and the worst part is, they didn't have a real motive at all. They heard that I used to drink a lot, and they just thought it would be funny if they framed me for being a drunk on the job. It's horrible, and I can't believe people are that terrible and evil. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised because it still stings. I know this may not be like other scary stories out there that people tell, but this was a real nightmare that could potentially ruin my life if there wasn't camera evidence. Being convicted for a crime you didn't commit is horrible, and it's something that I fear every day. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.